What's up, everybody? Thank you so much for joining us again. We are so fortunate that we've had so much feedback based off our first conversation. We really wanted to try to beef it up for you this time. We're gonna keep it on the edge here. This month, our topic with Spark in the Valley is
American hypocrisy.
American hypocrisy. As a formal introduction, my name is Julius. I was wanting to bring together a group of people who were open enough and well-rounded enough to have difficult conversations about difficult topics that plague America, the beautiful land on which we live. And I was so fortunate to meet some beautiful people out at a political event here in our lovely city, Athens, Tennessee. Joining us is, I really want them to introduce themselves. I want you to hear their voices when they say their names. They all have lovely voices and lovely faces.
I'm Alex.
I'm JP.
And I'm Cody.
And we are Spark in the Valley.
Yes, we are.
We all agreed that conversation, dialogue, is the key to true democracy. Like, let's be real about it. Let's be for real about it. Founding fathers that came together, as crazy as they were, and they were still wanting to have dialogue with one another. That was the crux of
that conversation. Like they wanted to be able to share in opposite values.
Yeah,
Like
absolutely.
they wanted to have a well-rounded union. You know, they understood that not everyone was going to be able to see eye to eye, but that everyone would be able to put the country first.
Yeah.
Well, they valued those differences because they had been living under a monarchy for so long, where it was one person telling them everything that they had to do and everything that they had to follow and how they should feel about things. And I think the idea of freedom and being able to have opposing views was very cathartic for them, maybe. Like this, like, oh, finally, we can finally feel the way we want to feel about something. And they respected that in each other because they respected the differences. And we have lost that, you know, and I know I'm guilty of it. So it's definitely one of those things.
I think we all are. In some
Yeah,
way, shape, or
I think
form.
we all are. It's kind of the effect of what we live in right now. We live in a very divided space, and it's very hard to identify with the other side, which is part of the reason that we're doing this, is that we want to hear those and we want to be more open, and we're on an active journey to be able to have those conversations and to be more open as people. Because I know that's something for me. Like I mentioned in the last episode, that I don't have political conversations with people I know have opposite politics from me because it's uncomfortable.
Right.
It's hard to have those conversations, and I've done it. I've done it quite a bit, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
You know, and so
For me, I've specifically recently started talking to people with opposing views about politics, and it's actually been nice. I've been able to relate more. If you talk to them, a lot of times you'll find if they're open-minded enough to actually talk and have a conversation, that you have a lot more in common than you think.
yeah.
And that's something that people just don't understand, especially because it's so hard to have a conversation nowadays. But it's just been a good way to connect with people.
One of the things that we had talked about before is like it's hard to have those conversations with people is because people identify so much with their political stances, and they can't separate, or at least have trouble separating a person from their political viewpoints. And I mean, there are some things that go hand in hand. You're going to feel certain ways about things and act certain ways with different types of political views, but for the most part, at least for a well-rounded ordinary person, they should be able to have like their own separate personality from their actual political values and beliefs, you know. But I mean, it has become, at least here lately, to a point where it's like your political identity is your personality, And I mean, that does make it a little bit difficult, because whenever you try and disagree with someone's political value, it's like you're almost attacking them personally.
Yeah.
Or at least it gets viewed that way.
Yeah.
I find it's easy if you find something in common with them to get that conversation going. You find common ground.
Yeah, you got to find common ground.
And then that's when you can break into the things that you disagree with. And that gets that conversation. You're on an even playing field. Like, we have something in common already. So now let's talk about the hard stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that creates some empathy, some respect there.
Yeah.
That needs to be there in order to have those tough conversations.
Yeah. Have respect for the person you're talking to, and a lot of times that respect will come back to you. In my experience.
Yeah, that's one thing a lot of people
It also helps that
forget.
you're a large white male. Just saying.
But I mean,
It's easier to have conversations like that sometimes when you are more privileged. You know what I mean? Like, not to call you out, but I think that is one of those things that
Well, that's the
probably
perspective
comes
that I
into play.
have. So that's the perspective.
No, and it's a valuable perspective. I'm just saying that there's also something in that as well, that I
Yeah.
think that it's sometimes crossing those barriers is really hard. Like if I were to talk to a white man who is a Trump supporter, it may not go as smoothly for me because I'm a woman.
yeah, and
Do you know what I'm
there's already
saying?
so many,
There's so much there already that's
Yeah.
biased, whereas he's going to see more of himself in you, and he might be able to have a more well-rounded, easy conversation.
Well, you're
with
assuming
you.
that I'm talking to a white man as well, which is not always. who
No,
I'm
I was
talking to.
using that as an example for me talking to a white male who is a Trump supporter, and if you were having that same conversation, not necessarily that's all the conversations you have. I'm
because
just
that's
saying.
really what this is about, is the ease of having different conversations.
Or the difficulty.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Sorry, the difficulty as well, and how it was in the past. It was easier to have different conversations, but at the same time, it was more difficult because you didn't have a voice. There was no voice, and so there was a situation where there was only one type of person having many conversations for tons of people, and their voice was not heard. And so that's why Sparking the Valley formed, so that we could explore these different things. We could explore how to have those conversations, because let's face it, we are where we are right now as a nation because we aren't having the convos.
I agree. I think that it's one of the things that we've really lost. One of the casualties of the last 5 years has been the ability to communicate with each other, because we just don't have empathy for each other anymore. And it's really tough.
Going to what we had discussed about watching this week, we had talked about watching the Your Vote Explained, or Whose Vote Counts. Yeah, Whose Vote Counts explained on Netflix.
Yeah.
We did go through and watch episode 3. A lot of us watched the full thing. But specifically, we were going to talk about episode 3, the Electoral College. One of the things that they talked about in there is how the peaks of the values of both parties had completely shifted to one side or the other. So the divide grew in such a way that it became easier to just ignore people on the other side and only surround yourself in, like kind of what you said, an echo chamber, so you could not have that safe space where you could just say what you want and only hear what you want, instead of going out and trying not to convince people to believe like you, but at least trying to get that common ground, like Cody was saying, being able to like stand kind of on the same footing and say, oh, I believe this way, but I believe that way.
You have less middle ground because of that.
We definitely have a lot less middle ground. It's a lot harder for a far right conservative to agree with a far left liberal.
Well, and the other thing that was mentioned in one of the other episodes was that Republicans, they now have a smaller cohort of people that they have to get their vote, and they can still win because of the way that things are so rigged.
Yeah, everything
with
is
gerrymandering and all of this kind of stuff.
And the redistricting of the voting districts.
Yeah, but there's also, because so many of the Democrats are isolated in cities, so much of the rural area has become mostly Republican, and there's less purple places. It's almost all like red, and because of that, the Republicans really only have to ask for the vote of like a certain kind of person who's living in a certain kind of area, and it's a much smaller population. So whereas Republicans are winning by small margins all over the country, Democrats are winning by landslides in cities, but that's not helping Democrats.
Right.
Instead, it's leaving Republicans with a lot more power than is actually should be distributed.
Right.
So it's really kind of backwards in a lot of ways, and it's frustrating. It's frustrating as a Democrat because you're like, it doesn't make actual sense.
Yeah.
It's just the way our system has been rigged, and it doesn't kind of adhere to that one person, one vote, my vote counts kind of thing that we hear, as an American, of course my vote counts. Well, in some instances, some people's votes count a whole lot more than other people's votes.
Yeah.
Like people in swing states, people in Michigan had thousands more percentage-wise
of voting power than somebody
power.
in California.
Yes.
It's
just crazy. I mean, and in 2016 that was the case because they were a key swing state.
Yeah.
But that doesn't seem like that falls in line with what America is supposed to be about, right? That we all count.
Well, that's very interesting you bring that up. Part of the portion that I thought was very interesting on the Whose Vote Counts special was they talked about how the Founding Fathers really never intended for us to have parties.
Yes.
In fact, that they thought that parties would be
the end of America.
Yeah, that was a quote
American
from George
democracy.
Washington.
Yes. Yeah. And so, when we understand where like the party system comes from and the intentions behind all of that, we can really start to say to ourselves, okay, not just whose vote is counting, but like, who isn't counting.
Right. And then we get into the disenfranchisement of black voters, of felons, of a lot of Hispanic voters.
Yeah, basically non-white voters.
Yeah, non-white voters. Yeah. Even women. I mean, they were showing some statistics and saying that actually statistically our voting block looks very similar to the way it did a couple hundred years ago.
Now.
Is that the biggest voting block is the white older male.
Mm-hmm.
It looks very similar to what it did when the Founding Fathers were around.
And so, we don't want to come off as complaining. We don't want to come off as,
Oh, I'm complaining. I'm kidding.
Well, we are. There's some things that need to be fixed.
It is a little bit of complaining.
Yeah.
I mean, like, we understand that the system isn't working in the way that it was intended, or the way that it should.
It's been manipulated in such a way.
That's it.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. This is a formal.
It's a formal complaint.
This is a formal complaint.
I'll be writing a very strongly worded letter this week. I don't know who I'm sending it to, but I'm gonna write it.
Oh, we're gonna hear. I would love to hear what that. No, but okay. So with the special again, we're talking about the Netflix special, Whose Vote Counts. There are 4 episodes, or three episodes, mini episodes,
about 25 minutes apiece.
Correct. And if you haven't watched it, please watch it. It's great. It explains a lot, but there's also a lot that isn't talked about, which is more or less what our podcast is about. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that personally was an eye-opener for me, I don't know about anybody else when they watched it, but I complain a lot about the Electoral College. Not really understanding that gerrymandering and redistricting, redrawing of the maps is really what's keeping people, let me say this. It's continuing to elect the people that Americans aren't electing.
Right, that aren't voting for.
That we are not voting for.
Right. So I heard one of the amazing women, I can't remember her name now, who was on there, she or on the Whose Vote Counts Explained, she said, because of gerrymandering and because of the way that they're redistricting and drawing the lines, the politicians are choosing the electorate, not the electorate choosing the politicians.
There it is.
And I was like, there she goes.
Yeah.
She hit it right on the head.
Yeah.
I mean, that is exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
They're able to choose down to a person. I mean, there have been stories about redistricting being done and people who live on one side of the street being in one district and on the other side of the street being in a different district because maybe there were more Republicans on one side and more Democrats on the other. So it's really kind of wild. I mean, it is it's amazing how exact and precise they can be.
Mm-hmm.
So this was not as much of a problem before because you had to do this manually. But as technology has gotten more and more and more advanced, and you can just put these things into a computer, it can decide based on what factors you want how to redistrict. So when Republicans got back, because in the 90s, Democrats had gerrymandered things, and they were in power, and the Republicans were down.
Right.
And so this is not just a Republican problem. It's just that it's a Republican problem right now. Because they're the ones who have this really unfair advantage.
There's a heavy tilt. Let's give an example. And obviously, this comes directly from the special, but so we understand that President Trump got how many votes? I think it was like 63 million or something like that. 63 million votes. Hillary Clinton got 66
in the popular vote.
Right?
Yeah, it was over 2 million. It was that was the difference. Over 2 million,
right?
Which is absolutely
it's ridiculous.
Crazy.
But let's dig a little deeper here. The American people voted for someone who is not in office, and the person that they didn't ultimately vote for, who is now in office, has now had the ability to place how many Supreme Court?
3 if Amy Coney Barrett gets through.
These people will be able to serve for a lifetime.
3, and how many is it? 9?
Yeah, it's 9
so
right
a
now.
third of our Supreme Court is appointed by one person,
and they're all very young.
One person that we didn't vote for.
They got 2 million less votes, and
it's ridiculous.
Well, and that also brings up a really serious issue with the Electoral College, which I'm sure we'll get into. But part of the problem is that it's not only that the Electoral College is not effectively representing our country, and we'll get into why and how, but it's also that it's a winner-takes-all system. So you could have a almost 50-50 split in a state, and it doesn't matter that somebody almost won, half the votes. Whoever wins gets all those votes. So it's not actually representing the way that people voted at all, and it's extremely unfair in my opinion. And so I take a lot of umbrage with that. It really bothers me.
Yeah, 'cause it's basically removing that one vote mentality.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, like one person, one vote mentality.
It completely contradicts the idea that my vote counts.
Yeah, because it's like if you voted for the loser, it doesn't matter. Your vote is now the winner's.
And this is where the fundamental argument that quote unquote my vote doesn't count comes from.
Absolutely. And it really is so discouraging. And I just want to say that we have to remember that this is just like going on strike somewhere, that the power is in the people. The power is in the numbers. So if we go out and vote, like we're seeing historic numbers right now, early voting has been historic, especially with young voters.
Congratulations, everybody.
Yes, I mean, agreed. And the thing is that's going to make a huge difference. They are predicting that this will be the highest voter turnout since 1908.
1908, yeah, I saw that.
And
earlier.
they still think that it will only be about 65% of the voting populace. Now, how disappointing is that? That means 35% of our country is not voting.
Yeah, how many
So that's
is
a
that?
real problem, because if we did all go out and vote, it would reflect a lot more and a lot better, even with the Electoral College. It would reflect more of what we want. So it's just really, it's kind of a shame that we have this like argument of my vote doesn't count, but there's kind of some precedent there. And I understand why people feel so discouraged about voting. I get it. Because when you hear about this and you learn about the Electoral College, it is extremely demoralizing.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we have a statement from Professor George Edwards III at Texas A&M University. He said that the Electoral College violates the core tenet of democracy, that all votes count equally and allows the candidate finishing second to win the election. Why hold an election if we do not care who received the most votes?
It's an interesting question.
At the moment, the Electoral College favors Republicans because of the way Republican votes are distributed across the country. They are more likely to occur in states that are closely divided between the parties. And so this seems like a fundamental issue within one another, within human beings too. And that's honestly, another part of our podcast, which is more or less the misinformation and how that can create an opinion or create a moral, that somebody's going to stand on and fight and kill another person based off of that moral.
Oh, sure. We've seen it. Yeah.
Which is dangerous.
It's so dangerous.
And only in 2020 are we now saying that these organizations that hold these terroristic views are now a problem.
Some of us are.
Some of us are.
Some of us who happen to be in charge of the country are not saying that.
Oh,
So
I wonder who that could be.
I wonder.
So one action item that we can kind of bring up early is we should research gerrymandering and compare and contrast it to the Electoral College.
Also, there was a fascinating story I read about this woman in Michigan. I forget her name. I think it was Katie Fahey. This woman is incredible. She just decided, she put out a Facebook post one day and said, I want to do something about gerrymandering. Does anybody want to help me?
Oh, it's awesome.
And she started a whole foundation with volunteers based on the fact that she wanted to stop gerrymandering in Michigan because it had become such a problem. And she started this. There's actually there's a documentary on Hulu called Slay the Dragon, and the dragon is a historically known district in Massachusetts that looked like a dragon that showed just how much they had gerrymandered so that it was very specific to Republican control, I believe. I think it was Republican control at that time. But she wanted to fix it. So she essentially got all of the signatures in order to get a ballot measure put on onto the ballot for an amendment that stopped the politicians from redistricting and instead, I think, put in an independent commission, which several states have.
Yeah.
And they won.
Wow.
By 62% or something like that.
Wow.
So she ended up essentially changing the laws of gerrymandering in Michigan. This one woman who doesn't want to run for office, who doesn't want to be she doesn't want to be in charge of everything. She's not looking for that. She just wanted to fix this problem, and she did it.
That's who a politician
incredible.
should be. That's what a politician should be. Somebody
Absolutely.
that doesn't, no desire.
That's part of
but
the reason
they
I
see a
like Meg
problem.
Gorman so much.
Yes.
Because she was just like, I don't particularly want this job.
Yeah.
I just had to step up because nobody else was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And she took it upon herself. She took it upon her own moral authority and said, okay, I think that I need to do something different, even though this isn't something I really pictured myself doing or even particularly want. I just feel like I need to. And I think that just shows such character.
Yeah.
I don't think we brought up Meg yet.
Thank you. I was just about to say, let's
we do have a great interview with her.
So if anybody may not know, Meg Gorman is our third congressional district.
She's running for the Tennessee 3rd Congressional District in the House of Representatives.
Thank you very much. And we've met her twice as a group. She is wonderful.
Very lovely person.
She is more than willing to answer your questions, to talk to you.
Anything you throw at her, she's more than happy to give a authentic answer.
Yes.
And I really appreciate the interview that we did with her this past weekend because I came up to her before we had started the actual interview, and I was like, oh, hey, because I know how politicians can be, or people that are running for political office.
They're tired.
They're tired. They would like to at least know what they're going to have asked before you go up to them. So I was trying to just prep her, hey, just so you know, my question's going to be kind of about this. She's like, no, don't, please don't. Yeah. He goes, I want you to hit me with that question when I'm on camera.
Wow.
Yeah, because she does not like to get prepared for questions and stuff like that. Yeah. And
well, not just that, but I told her, I was like, hey, do you mind if I ask you about abortion? And she was like, listen, you can ask me whatever you want to ask me because I should have an answer for everything. And if I don't have an answer, then I'm not doing my job correctly.
That's wild.
And,
I respect that.
And then I asked a completely different question, and she did not even blink. I asked a question about felon disenfranchisement for voting, and she was just like, she never even blinked. She was like, oh, no, I think absolutely this,
Yeah.
And it was just so impressive to me. I just think she's so real, and she's so vibrant, and she just has such strong character, and I think she's such a wonderful candidate. Like, I'm so happy to see her running against Chuck Fleischman.
That's great.
Because he is not any of those things.
Well, and look, we can say that because we haven't seen him.
We haven't seen him.
Yeah, I mean, like, honestly, I can't remember the last time that Chuck Fleischman opened himself up to like a town hall meeting
Ever?
or debate.
Yeah.
You know,
Listen.
I mean, like, she's been trying to get him on a debate stage for a long time,
And he just
keeps
refuses.
blowing her off, you know.
And he's like, oh, I'm trying to find solutions for things that affect East Tennesseans. And then he votes down the stimulus bill.
Yeah.
You know, like, so obviously he's not trying to find solutions for one of the states that's probably the most impoverished in the country.
Yeah, I mean, Chuck Fleischman is a typical politician. He's all talking, no action.
Is it Fleischman?
Fleischman.
Fleischman. See, if we had met him, he would have been able to tell us what his last name was.
Right, exactly.
But
If we'd ever seen his face.
If he could come onto the podcast, yeah, he could tell us how his last name is. But until then, he's
And listen,
Fleischman.
we are not.
We are going to put out. We're going to try to get a hold of him and see if we can get him on the podcast.
We are not a one-sided podcast. I need to make that very clear. We all have our own personal opinions.
Yeah, we just have questions. We
But-
just have questions that we feel like people need answered.
For anybody listening, it's 30 minutes in now. You may have just heard one-sidedness. Listen, we are talking about the facts. We're talking about the major issues that Americans deal with, that Tennesseans deal with, that the Vols deal with. And, you know, we also understand that on both sides there are good and bad. We just talked about gerrymandering and how both sides, both Democratic and Republicans in the past, have used gerrymandering to their benefit.
Exactly. And the Democrats weren't right when they did it either.
Correct.
It's just that they're not the ones who are in that power now. And because
That's
of
kinda what we're talking
technology,
about.
And the fact that both sides have done it means it's a real problem.
it's a
Yeah,
very serious
yeah,
problem. That's
yeah.
exactly right. It needs
Yeah.
to be, what needs to happen when it comes to gerrymandering is that politicians should not be in charge of redistricting.
That's it.
It should be done by an independent commission.
That's it.
An
That-
independent, nonpartisan commission.
Nonpartisan commission.
That's the same
Very
thing
important.
of us being cool with the police department investigating itself on fraud or
Right,
on
exactly.
something that has happened.
Or looking at like the election between Kemp and Stacey Abrams,
Yeah, no.
and he was the Secretary of
Yeah.
State who was in
Hello.
charge of the election
Hello.
and shut down a bunch of polling places
Hello.
so that it was harder for people to vote because he knew that if he did that, he would win. And he won by a very slim margin
He had
against
to
her.
cheat to win barely.
He had to cheat to barely win. That's exactly right.
And so voter disenfranchisement is a more real thing than, quote, voter fraud. Voter fraud actually
Oh.
virtually doesn't even exist.
Exactly. Oh, there's some crazy numbers. Something like in the last 16 years, there's only been like 45 cases of voter fraud or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah.
And the suspicious mail-in voting has been out of the millions that are sent in over the years. It's like less than 1%.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
0.0025% or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it's something crazy. Like, it's not even a problem. Like, one of the political commentary guys who was on, I think, the Explained series was talking about this, and he said it is a minimal problem in America if it's a problem at all.
Yeah.
And it was like, oh man.
But
like,
we do know what is a problem. And that's the other one, the other side of that. The disenfranchisement,
Oh, yeah.
right?
I mean, that's the history of America. That was voter disenfranchisement in one way or another. You know, and there's been a lot of enfranchisement as well, you know, with
Yeah.
women being allowed to vote and Native Americans being allowed to vote,
Yeah.
and then black people being allowed to vote with the Voting Rights Act. And then, of course, they changed the voting age from 21 to 18, which
Correct.
enfranchised more young people.
Who did that?
Um,
Nixon? Reagan? No.
I don't know.
Nixon?
I don't know who did that.
I don't know who did that. Is that my phone ringing? I think it's time for a conversation with misinformation. Hey, girl,
Hey, Julius.
what you got for us today?
Oh, it's just your favorite rage-filled librarian coming to talk to you about the Electoral College. So, the Electoral College, something we've all heard about, probably heard somebody complain about, but we're not really sure how it works. Well, this week I looked into how it works, and if possible, I'm even angrier. So I got all my information from an article from The Guardian, and it's called Electoral College Explained: How Biden Faces an Uphill Battle in the U.S. Election. And it does a really good job of explaining how the Electoral College works and why it misrepresents a ton of states in our country. So there's 538 electors, and technically when we vote for these electors who then decide who becomes the president. Each president or presidential candidate runs for different electoral votes in each state. And each state, it's supposed to be based on population, but that's not really how it works out. So for smaller states, they're totally overrepresented. They have tons of votes comparatively to their population. When you look at larger states like California or Texas, they're actually really underrepresented. And there's a larger amount of population per every electoral vote. So for instance, in California, they have 55 electoral votes. But really, when that works out, it's 718,000 people per electoral vote. But if you go right over to Wyoming with a much smaller population, they may have less electoral votes overall, but each electoral vote they have counts for 193,000 people. So how does that seem fair? And it's especially unfair for Democrats because when you look at some of these larger states like California, it's really unfortunate because they might always go blue, but they're not actually representing the amount of people, which is why in the 2016 election, Hillary Clinton could have 3 million more votes of the popular vote because so many of those were from California, but she could still lose the election because she didn't get the electoral vote she needed. So for each presidential candidate to win, or for either one to win, they have to reach 270 electoral votes. And it's really like whoever gets there first. The other problem with the Electoral College, or at least in my opinion, the other problem with the Electoral College, is it's a winner, kind of like it's a free-for-all in a lot of ways, is that winner takes all. It's a winner takes all. So let's say that you have a state like Florida, which in 2016, Trump only won by 2.2%. But he still got all the electoral votes from Florida. So how is that fair? It doesn't seem like it works out correctly because at the end of the day, all of those people who voted for the other party in that state are not being represented. The idea of America is that each one of our votes counts, right? That we're supposed to matter. But even further than that, when we look at things like swing states make up a huge part of the Electoral College having certain benefits to certain parties. Perhaps the Republicans right now. And so with swing states, they really decide the election. So there's a ton of states that essentially your vote doesn't really matter. So in 2016, Michigan was a swing state, and its vote, one person's vote in Michigan was worth thousands more percent than a vote from, let's say, Tennessee, because they were a swing state. So they decided a lot of the election. And so if let's say it swings just 1% one way or 1% the other way, it could change the whole election and who wins. So it's really problematic. The Electoral College is an old system that our founders came up with to make sure that states had representation. But they also believed that we shouldn't have parties. Political parties were thought to be possibly the end of our republic, of our democracy. And that's a real problem. I think that it's been divided, and there's a lot of advantages happening for certain states and for certain parties. This Electoral College doesn't work for a country that is as large as ours is. As we can see, population is not being represented correctly. So there are many other solutions and options. There's a ranked system like Maine uses. It's a little confusing, but you can look into it. It makes sense. The person who makes the most votes gets the first slot. And whoever the second choice was for first place goes on to the second one, and so on and so on. And it represents the population far more fairly. There's also just the popular vote. One vote, one person, and that person counts. So that would drastically change our elections, and a lot of people are really scared of that. I've seen a lot of memes and misinformation about the Electoral College and how it works. And I just want to tell you to be wary of that. It doesn't always represent the way things work. So you know how you can fix that? You can fact check things. You can look up an article from a respected newspaper or respected periodical, and you can read through and you can decide for yourself, based on the evidence, whether or not you think the Electoral College is fair or not fair. In my opinion, it's very unfair, but that's just my opinion. You can kind of decide for yourself. And that's misinformation.
So this commentary that this man was talking about, that voter suppression tactics don't necessarily work on their own. They work minimally on their own, but the problem is that they overlap each other. So all these techniques come in together. So in history, we see things like literacy tests, poll taxes, things like that disenfranchised voters, especially black voters. And one of the women was talking about a man who had helped raise her, and she was saying that he remembered having to take a literacy test, and his question was, how high is up?
Right.
And how crazy is that? And it was things like count the jelly beans in this jar, and if you get the number correct, you can vote. I mean, that's crazy. And so that it's more about all these voter suppression techniques that we're seeing now, things like reducing polling places, not having mail-in voting everywhere. Absentee voting in many states is not, you have to have an excuse like that you're in the military or something like that. I know it's like that for Louisiana because I used to absentee ballot for Louisiana, and I could do that because I worked for a university. And if you were a student or a teacher at a university, you could do that, but otherwise you couldn't. And so it's really very restrictive. So you start to see all these different ways that these voter suppression techniques, things like really strict voter ID laws, stuff like that, all of those things overlap to make a really big effect. Whereas individually they may not have as much of an effect, but once they're all put together and they're cumulative, they grow and they create widespread voter suppression, which historically has helped Republicans more.
So that's actually a good segue. We wanted to let our viewers kind of get a glimpse of our communication with Meg Gorman. This was Friday. I guess the date doesn't matter, but it was here in Athens, Tennessee.
The 23rd.
The 23rd. Thank you very much.
October the 23rd.
We had a town hall with Meg.
The second one we've had, the first one was with Marquita Bradshaw.
Yes.
Another great candidate, lovely
She's running
woman.
for Senate. She's incredible. Amazing environmentalist, amazing single mom. She's just an incredible woman.
She has an endorsement from Johnny Knoxville.
Yes, she does.
She does.
Which was his first political endorsement ever. So,
Wow.
I mean, it's got to speak a little bit.
It speaks a lot of it.
Yeah.
When a jackass speaks for you. Now.
Right.
Come on.
Come on, Steve-O.
Yeah. But no, here's the interview. We hope you enjoy it. We know you will. It's also on YouTube if you're listening, so you can watch along. And we'll be back. Enjoy. In 3, 2, 1.
Hi, everybody. I'm Alex Sharp with Spark in the Valley podcast, and today we're going to interview Meg Gorman, who's running for our 3rd district representative position in Tennessee. And we're just going to ask her a couple of questions, and I'm going to start. So I'm going to go with my question. My question is, this is going to throw you for a loop because I've already told you one other one. Oh well, guys. A study recently came out that said 1 in 5 black voters in Tennessee are disenfranchised due to felonies. What would you do to help get those felons their rights back for voting, or do you support that? So I absolutely support not just voting rights being restored, but I actually firmly believe that unless it's a case of treason or an act against our country, that those rights should not be removed in the first place. Those people are still living in America. They are still citizens. And we shouldn't be using punishments and revoking rights like that. It should be that if someone is incarcerated, it is for the safety of the community. It is because that person has been a threat, and that's it. So we don't need to rely on our prisons as rehabilitation centers, because we've seen that that does not work. So I think that we need to treat people, whether they are in prison or not, like Americans. If they are citizens and they are 18 or older, they should be able to vote. End of story. Thank you so much. All right, we'll have our next question here.
Hey Meg, how are you? Great. All right, so I honestly have a follow-up question to the question I was just asked. a lot of the incarcerations that we understand in prisons are due to non-violent drug offenses, right? If you look at the number of people that are, as you stated, a threat to our society compared to people who just, well, let's say are not a threat to our society, there's a big number. What are some things that we can do as citizens to help you get the word out that we don't want nonviolent drug offenses or offenders incarcerated?
Sure. So there are actually a few different groups, and many of these are kind of grassroots groups that are local to the road areas who actually will pay bail for people who are in jail who cannot pay. And many of these people are nonviolent offenders. Many of these people have simple possession charges, things of that nature, but they cannot afford to make bail. And so I think being aware of that, knowing that this is an option, knowing that this is something that impacts a lot of people, and even if it doesn't impact you directly, even if you haven't been arrested for a charge like this, understanding the detriment that comes with a charge like this, the lasting impact that it can have on your life. And for many of these people, if you're sitting in jail and you can't make bail, you're losing your job because you're not showing up. And that's on your record. You got fired because you did not show up to your job. Why did you not show up? You're in jail. And so when you think about those long-term effects, that impact that it has on individuals, on their families, it's a lot. And just sharing that information in the community, letting people know there is a better solution for this. Frankly, I am a firm believer that marijuana should be legalized, recreational and medical. I think it is antiquated for us to not explore that in all areas of the country, and have that because we've seen that is not a threat to anyone. So, and then when we do have drug charges where they are serious drugs, where there are concerns about a person's safety, we need to be concerned for their safety. That means not locking someone away. That means actually helping someone get the help that they need so that they can become productive members of society.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Meg. And maybe we can get some of the names of those grassroots movements and get them on our blog so that we're all aware of them. Thank you so much. All right, we'll have the next question.
Okay, my question to you would be, as a young person who is running for political office in 2020, which this year has been crazy anyway, it's easy to get kind of like disillusioned with what's going on. As someone that is running though, what advice would you give to other young folks that are out there and want to figure out what they can do to better the world around them?
So there are a lot of options. There are a lot of ways to get involved. And a lot of times it starts with volunteering for a local campaign or for a local cause. And I think often people underestimate how much their participation can help and the impact that their participation can have. But then they get involved with a grassroots organization. They start organizing in their communities and they see, I'm helping, I'm making a difference. And then it's easy for that to translate and for those skills to transfer into running for office if that's something that you want to do. Now, I don't have a political background. I volunteered on campaigns in the past, but I'm not a politician. And for me, as someone who does not enjoy public speaking, someone who, frankly, before this campaign never did speak publicly, that came as something that I just had to accept and be okay with. And so for me, it was about seeing there is a huge need. I am privileged in that, to be honest, regardless of the outcome of this election, I personally will still have a roof over my head. I'll still have a job. I'll still know where my next meal is coming from. But that's not the case for a lot of people. And it's exactly because of that privilege, that there is an even greater duty to step up and do something when you're in a place to make change. I hope I answered your question.
Definitely. Okay, and then we've got our last question over here.
The child.
Oh, the child, yes. For the children.
So we live in a predominantly red state, and I'm sure you've come across plenty of people with opposing viewpoints. What is your strategy for talking to someone who feels strongly opposite than you do, and how do you deal with those type of conversations?
Yeah. Honestly, sometimes when those happen, I'm a little bit caught off guard. It's hard to know what someone's views are going to be, but those are some of my favorite engagements because it really does make everything clear and make you realize that we are all, even if we think that we're divided, there are so many things that we all want. We all want the same thing, and where we differ is how we get there. And so often those conversations start off with, "Hi, my name is Meg. I'm running for Congress to represent Tennessee's 3rd District, to represent you and your family in the U.S. Congress." And people will say, "Are you a Democrat or a Republican?" I will say, "Well, I'm running as a Democrat, but I'm not running to represent a party. I'm running to represent the people of Tennessee's 3rd District. Democrat, Republican, Independent, we all deserve real, meaningful representation, regardless of party affiliation." And I think often that softens the conversation a little bit. And anything that we can do to break down those walls and overcome those obstacles. And that means just treating people with kindness and respect. I've had people who responded really horribly in text banking, lots of expletives and slurs about women and things of that nature. And just letting people know, okay, nope, well, I would still love to represent you, and I hope you have a great night. And it's really difficult to argue with compassion, because there's really no argument against compassion. I think letting people know, hey, I vote for me or not, I'm gonna fight for you. Love me or not, I'm gonna love you. Whether you like it or not, I'm gonna love you. So that's the message.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that interview with Meg Gorman. We're so thankful to her for coming out and allowing us to interview her. And we want to thank the McMinn County Democratic Party and the McMinn County Young Democrats who arranged it so that our community could experience Meg and see what she's all about. Yeah.
Don't forget to follow us on all social media. Right now, we're active on both Facebook and Instagram. Facebook, you just type in the search bar, Spark in the Valley. And then Instagram, it's pretty easy. It's at Spark in the Valley. Then right now, we are available on Anchor Podcasts, on Spotify Podcasts, Pocket Casts, and also on YouTube. What? And we are coming to a lot more platforms very soon. I know Apple Podcasts is right around the corner and stuff like that. So yeah, be sure to check us out and make sure you like, share, subscribe everywhere that we're at right now.
Yes.
Great way to show support.
Thank you very much, JP. That was awesome. Main reason why we do this for social media too is to engage with our listeners and our viewers. We want to hear what you have to say. We talk about the difficult topics so that you can learn how to talk about them with your friends and family. We talked about a lot. This podcast, this episode, this is our first official episode. We did have episode 0, which was very well received, but we came back today with gerrymandering, voter disenfranchisement, electoral college, all these different things that make it difficult for the American voice to be heard on a consistent basis. We want to focus every episode at the end on something we're calling action points. It's where we each come up with an action point for all of us to do to aid in this conversation. One thing that I suggest all of us do is to continue to research gerrymandering, continue to research the Electoral College. It's very, very confusing for a very, very interesting reason, mainly to hush voices, hush votes, push votes into, a corral.
Yeah, steal votes.
Steal votes.
Yeah.
But don't take my word for it. Research it. It's insane, but it's been a part of our culture, the fabric of America since time. Actually, since 1776, I guess.
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah.
But that's it for me.
All right, my action point is go fucking vote.
Yeah.
Just do it, guys.
Just do it.
Do research your plan.
Nike that vote.
Nike
that vote, guys. Just go do it. It's so important that we practice, and I know that today might have actually been a little discouraging, but when it comes to our voice, that sort of thing. But the fact of the matter is that we're showing up and we're voting in historic numbers this year, and there's a reason for that. And you just got to get out, and the only way that you can be heard in this country is by voting. It is our greatest right, and we have to do it.
Feels your voice and your vote matter.
Yes.
Absolutely, it does.
Yes.
Absolutely,
it's
it does.
easy to get stuck into that depression of it just doesn't matter. I do not matter. What I think doesn't matter, and that's what they want.
And here's
what
the
they
thing:
want.
you have to remember the Electoral College only applies to the president. So when it comes to all of your local elections, your
There you
Senate
go.
elections,
There
your
you
Congress
go.
representative elections, all of those things, your vote does matter.
Yeah.
It is literally, it comes down to one vote
Yeah.
can make the difference.
There you go.
So please remember that even though we talked about these things today that can be discouraging, when it comes to statewide and local elections, that vote is absolutely vitally important.
Preach it, girl.
So please go vote. Please go vote this
I
week.
love it.
We've got a week left about.
Yeah, I can't believe it.
This will come out on Thursday, so y'all will have several days left.
Yeah,
A couple days of
handful of
early
days.
voting, and then you'll be able to vote on Tuesday. So please look up your precinct, look up your polling place. Make sure you have enough time, and also remember that it is a right to go vote on Tuesday. Your employer has to let you go vote, so you have to exercise that right. You have to stand up and say, "Listen, it is my constitutional right that I am allowed to go vote today. So go vote."
Yeah.
Go do
Your
it.
employer should actually be influencing you.
They
to
should
do
be
that.
encouraging you to go
Yeah.
vote and practice your civic duty. That's
Yeah.
absolutely right.
Yeah.
And going off of the election week, I'm going to still stick with my same point from last week. If you have the time, just get in Netflix. If you are subscribed to Netflix, which most people are, but if you aren't, try to, or get somebody else's password.
That's it.
Do it.
Yeah. There is that 3-part series made by Vox called
Whose vote
Whose
counts?
Vote Counts. Thank you.
Explained.
Yeah,
Phenomenal.
explained. Yeah, you've got your 3 episodes. You've got the history of voting. You've got
Money and politics.
Yeah, money and politics, and then gerrymandering in the Electoral College, which is what we talked about today. Go watch those. Get yourself informed of everything that's going on. What we're up against. What the country is up against, really. And I mean, get angry, get mad, because that's what sparks that change. That's what's going to spark the conversation. Is people getting upset, people getting riled up about it.
Yeah.
And that goes to my action point, which is to spark a conversation with someone.
Yes.
Maybe might have opposing viewpoints, but that's the kind of person you need to talk to. That's the kind of person you need to be able to have this conversation with. Find common ground. We're all in this together.
Yes, we are.
We have far more similarities than we do differences.
We all want.
Don't forget that.
We all want the same thing. We all want to live in this country as peaceably as we can. Well, most of us want that, but a majority of us, that's what we're all fighting for.
Yeah. Well, we once again want to say thank you so much to our listeners. Thank you to our supporters, everyone who shares, likes, subscribes. You are the world to us. We will be having some trinkets to give out soon, so be on the look for that. Please come back, listen, engage with us next week. We have a very exciting week. If you don't know
Yes,
today,
we do.
What's the date today? What's today's date?
Today's the 26th.
Currently
All
the
right.
26th.
So we have how many days until election?
8.
8.
8.
8 days.
All right. So next week we'll actually have we're calling our election special, our Spark special.
Spark Spectacular.
Spark Spectacular.
Sparktacular.
Sparktacular.
Sparktacular 2020.
Look at that. I knew we could get there. Sparktacular 2020. We're skipping over Spooktacular 2020.
Right.
And we're going to go straight to Sparktacular 2020. But again, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Thank you all so much for listening. We really appreciate it. Don't forget, like, share, subscribe, follow us on all social media.
We do this for you.
We do.
Come back next week.
Spark in the Valley is a Purple Mountain Pods production. It is hosted by Julius Johnson, Alex Sharp, Jean-Pierre Vasquez, and Cody Hensley. This podcast is produced and directed by Julius Johnson and co-produced by Alex Sharp, Jean-Pierre Vasquez, and Cody Hensley. Music supervising and original music by Cody Hensley. Studio engineering and management by Rob Barnett. Research supervision by Alex Sharp. Social media management by Jean-Pierre Vasquez. Special thanks to Meg Gorman, McMinn County Democratic Party, and the McMinn Young Democrats.